The flames rose high into the night sky as Queen Marika stood before the burning temple. Her soldiers had done their work well. The sacred ground of the fire witches was now nothing more than ash and smoke. She watched with cold satisfaction as the last of the ancient order burned alive inside their sanctuary. But one had escaped. Zara crawled through the mud and blood, her red robes torn and stained. She was the youngest of the fire witches, barely 17 summers old. Her sisters, her mothers in spirit, her entire world burned behind her. She could hear their screams mixing with the crackling flames. The pain in her heart was worse than any wound. She turned and saw the queen standing there, proud and cruel, watching the destruction like it was entertainment. The royal banner of House Valderin flew above her head, the silver wolf howling at twin moons. That banner would burn in Zara's memory forever. With her last strength, Zara pulled herself to her knees. Blood dripped from a wound on her forehead. Her hands shook as she raised them toward the sky. The fire inside her chest was not from the burning temple. It was something older, something darker. It was the ancient power that every fire witch carried in their blood. Queen Marika saw the young witch and laughed. She did not fear a child. That was her mistake. Zara spoke words that had not been spoken in 1,000 years. Words that the elder witches had forbidden because they were too dangerous, too permanent. Words that could not be taken back once released into the world. Her voice grew louder with each syllable, and the flames behind her seemed to bend toward her, feeding her power. The curse left her lips like a serpent leaving its nest. It flew through the air, invisible but deadly, and wrapped itself around the queen's bloodline. Every child born to House Valderin would carry this curse. Every heir to the throne would die before they could take their rightful place. The royal line would know only grief and suffering until the last of them was gone. Queen Marika fell to her knees, clutching her chest. She felt the curse enter her body, her blood, her very soul. When she looked up again, the young fire witch was gone, vanished into the smoke and darkness. That was 300 years ago. Now, the kingdom of Valderin stood at the edge of extinction. Every generation had watched their heirs die young. Some fell to mysterious illnesses that no healer could cure. Others died in accidents that seemed impossible. A few simply fell asleep and never woke up. The throne had passed from cousin to cousin, from distant uncle to forgotten nephew. The family tree was more branches than trunk now, twisted and broken by centuries of tragedy. King Roland V sat alone in his throne room, staring at a letter that contained news he had been dreading. His son, Prince Adrian, was dead. The boy had been only 12 years old. He had been riding his horse near the eastern fields when the animal suddenly threw him. His neck broke on impact. No explanation, no reason, just death. Roland had already buried 3 children. His first wife had died giving birth to a stillborn daughter. His second wife had thrown herself from the tower after their twin sons died of fever on the same night. Now his third wife was locked in her chambers, screaming with grief for their only child. The curse was real. Everyone knew it. The fire witches had been destroyed, but their final act of revenge had haunted House Valderin for 3 centuries. Scholars had searched for ways to break the curse. Priests had prayed. Magicians had performed rituals. Nothing worked. The curse was too strong, too deeply woven into the blood of the royal family. But King Roland was not like his ancestors. He was a practical man, a man who had studied science and technology alongside magic and tradition. He had funded expeditions to distant lands, built schools for common children, and encouraged inventors to bring their ideas to his court. While his ancestors had looked to the past for salvation, Roland looked to the future. He had a plan. In the deepest chamber beneath the palace, a team of scientists worked on a project that had taken 20 years to complete. They called it the Genesis Chamber. Using technology recovered from ancient human starships that had crashed on this world long before the current kingdoms were formed, They had built a machine that could alter the very building blocks of life. The original humans who had settled this planet had brought incredible technology with them. Most of it had been lost during the chaos of early colonization, when the survivors had scattered and built small kingdoms. Over centuries, magic had emerged, perhaps a mutation caused by the unique radiation of this world. The fire witches and the other magical orders had risen, their powers blending the line between science and sorcery. But humans had never stopped being human. They adapted, they learned, they survived. And now, Roland was about to prove that human determination could overcome even the most powerful magic. Dr. Helena Cross led the team. She was a brilliant geneticist who had spent her entire life studying the royal bloodline. She had mapped every strand of their genetic code, searching for the fingerprint of the curse. What she found had amazed her. The curse was not magical at all, or rather, it was magic translated into biology. The Fire Witch's words had somehow rewritten the genetic code of Queen Marika's descendants. A tiny protein, invisible to ordinary examination, had been programmed into their DNA. This protein remained dormant for years, but something triggered it when the carrier got too close to taking the throne. Once activated, it caused rapid cellular breakdown, leading to death. The curse was brilliant in its cruelty. It allowed hope. Children were born healthy. They grew strong and smart. Families loved them, invested in them, dreamed of their futures. Then, just when everything seemed possible, death came knocking. The curse did not just kill. It destroyed hope over and over again. Helena had found the curse. Now, she could kill it. The Genesis chamber hummed with power as King Roland entered the laboratory. Helena stood beside a glowing pod where a single fertilized embryo floated in nutrient-rich fluid. This embryo carried the DNA of both Roland and his wife, but it had been modified. The cursed protein had been removed, replaced with clean genetic material taken from distant branches of the family that had never carried the throne's burden. This child would be the first heir of Valderin born without the curse in 300 years. Roland watched the embryo with tears in his eyes. So small, so fragile, yet carrying the hope of his entire kingdom. His people had suffered for so long. The curse had not only killed heirs, it had weakened the entire nation. Without stable leadership, corruption had spread. Wars had been lost. The people had grown weary and hopeless. But tonight, that would change. Helena pressed a series of buttons, and the pod began its acceleration process. Through genetic manipulation, the embryo would grow at an enhanced rate. Within 6 months, a healthy baby would be ready for birth. Roland's wife would carry the child for the final weeks, giving it the natural bond that every mother deserved. Across the kingdom, rumors began to spread. The king had found a cure. The curse was broken. Hope, that most dangerous and beautiful of human emotions, began to bloom like flowers after a long winter. But the curse had guardians. Deep in the mountains to the north, where the snow never melted and the wind howled like hungry wolves, a single figure sat beside a fire that burned without fuel. Zara had not aged in 300 years. The curse had kept her alive, bound to this world until her vengeance was complete. She felt every death of the Valderin heirs like a warm touch on her cold skin. Each one was a payment for the sisters she had lost. Now she felt something strange. A gap in the pattern, a hole where a new heir should have been forming. She closed her eyes and searched through the magical threads that connected her to the curse. What she found made her stand for the first time in decades. They had cheated her. They had used the forbidden science of the ancestors to remove her curse from their blood. The child growing in that chamber would be immune to her power. Zara's rage burned hot enough to melt the ice around her feet. She had sacrificed everything for this curse. Her youth, her future, her chance at love and happiness. She had given it all so that House Valderin would pay for what they had done. Now some clever scientist thought she could simply cut out the curse like a tumor. No, this could not stand. Zara gathered her power and flew south toward the capital. She moved like a comet, trailing fire across the night sky. Villages below pointed and screamed, thinking it was a falling star. They did not know that death itself was passing overhead. She arrived at the palace to find it heavily guarded. Roland had anticipated this. Soldiers lined the walls, armed with weapons both ancient and modern. Defensive shields powered by old technology flickered around the main buildings. This was not the careless kingdom of Queen Marika. This king had prepared for war. Zara attacked anyway. Fire rained from the sky as she unleashed 3 centuries of stored power. Soldiers burned where they stood. Shields flickered and died under the assault. Stone walls cracked and melted. The palace, which had stood for 1,000 years, began to crumble. But the humans did not run. They fought back with weapons that fired beams of concentrated energy, technology that had been rebuilt from ancient blueprints. Zara screamed as one beam struck her shoulder, the first wound she had felt in centuries. These were not the primitive warriors she had faced before. These were descendants of starfarers, children of a civilization that had crossed the void between worlds. She pushed through the pain and flew toward the laboratory. The child had to die. The curse had to continue. There could be no forgiveness for what Queen Marika had done. King Roland stood at the entrance to the laboratory, a sword in one hand and an energy pistol in the other. His armor was blackened from battle. Blood dripped from a cut on his cheek. But he did not move aside. Zara landed before him, her flames swirling around her like a protective cloak. She looked at this man, this distant descendant of her enemy, and saw something she had not expected. She saw grief. She saw love. She saw determination that matched her own. Roland spoke first. He told her about his children who had died. He described the pain of watching them grow, knowing that death was coming. He talked about his wives, destroyed by sorrow. He explained that he understood her rage, her desire for justice. What Marika had done was unforgivable. The fire witches had deserved better. But the children who had died were innocent. They had committed no crimes. They had never harmed anyone. They were just children who wanted to live, to play, to grow old. 300 years of dead children, and not one of them had deserved their fate. Zara hesitated. In all her centuries of waiting, she had never considered this. The faces of the dead heirs flooded her mind, pulled from the magical connection she had with her curse. So many children. So many tears from parents who would never recover. She had become the very monster she had sought to punish. The fire around her flickered and began to dim. Roland stepped closer, lowering his weapons. He offered her something unexpected. He offered her peace. He asked her to release the curse, to let the dead rest, to allow his kingdom to heal. In return, he would build a memorial to the fire witches. Their names would be remembered. Their sacrifice would be honored. History would record the truth of what Marika had done. Zara looked at this human king, this man who had lost everything yet still found room in his heart for mercy. She thought of her sisters, who had taught her that fire was meant to warm, not to destroy. She remembered the words of her eldest mother, who had said that vengeance was a flame that consumed the one who held it. She was so tired. 300 years of hatred had burned away everything else inside her. She did not want to fight anymore. Slowly, carefully, Zara reached into her own chest and pulled out the curse. It appeared as a ball of dark fire, pulsing with malevolent power. She held it for a long moment, feeling its weight, remembering all the pain it represented. Then she crushed it. The curse shattered like glass, scattering into harmless sparks that faded into nothing. Across the kingdom, the descendants of House Valderin felt a weight lift from their souls. In the laboratory, Helena watched as the embryo's vital signs stabilized completely. The hidden threat was gone. Zara collapsed. Without the curse sustaining her, she began to age rapidly. 3 centuries caught up with her in moments, but she smiled as she fell, because she was finally free. King Roland caught her before she hit the ground. He held the ancient witch as she took her last breath, and he wept for her. She had been a victim too, twisted by grief into something terrible. Now she was at peace. 9 months later, Princess Aurora was born. She was healthy and strong, with her father's eyes and her mother's smile. She would grow up to become the greatest ruler Valderin had ever known, leading her people into a new age of prosperity. The Fire Witches were never forgotten. A grand temple was built in their honor, staffed by scholars who studied their history and preserved their memory. The truth of Queen Marika's crime became part of every child's education. And each year, on the anniversary of the curse's breaking, the people lit candles and remembered both the witches who had died and the witch who had finally let go. Humanity had survived. They had faced an ancient curse and defeated it not with magic, but with science and compassion. They had shown that even the deepest wounds could heal, if people were willing to choose forgiveness over vengeance. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that night, as if the ancestors who had crossed the void to reach this world were proud of what their children had become.